Welcome back for our second week of our series called Focus. And last week we got started with the thought of focusing, and we talked about the importance of our thoughts, where we focus our thoughts, and positive, where we're thinking. Is it negative thoughts? Is it positive thoughts? Is it occasionally, or is it something that we're to think of the good things, as Paul said, the good things all through the day, through our whole lives. Paul said, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is noble, he said, think on these things. And that's the type of thing we're talking about, our thoughts, where we put our thinking. And I hope this week that you've been mindful of those things, that you took some notes and you confronted yourself and reviewed your day's conversations to look back and say, hey, what did I spend my time on good thoughts? Well, today we're going to move on to something else. In Hebrews 12, we're told that you remember Paul, or the writer is talking about, he says, we're to run the race. Run that race with perseverance. Don't give up. Stay with it. And then he gets to Hebrews 12, verse 2. He says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So what I want us to do today is just talk about where our eyes, focusing our eyes. And you could take that many different ways, couldn't you? How you focus your eyes. Are you looking at things the right way? Are you taking a wrong view of type things? On the spiritual side of things, or just the how we view life, or is it the fact that you can't see as well as you used to? If you like our household, we've got cheater sunglasses, and everybody, I mean not sunglasses, but cheater glasses laying around everywhere. All of you know what that is, because our eyes are just not the same as they were. And so we have the aids to help us that. I thought it was so funny last week. I talked about being able to see. And the first time you put on glasses or contacts, we didn't know we couldn't see. I had 3 different people this week tell me that when they got their first pair of glasses, they got out when they were driving home, they said to their mother or their father, I can see the leaves. They didn't realize that the trees, they couldn't see the detail of the leaves, and so that. But that's not what I'm talking about today when I talk about, focusing with those things. I want to talk about a different thing of how we focus our eyes on something. Let's play a little game to start with here. I'm going to show you some things, and what I want you to do is to help me fill in the blank. See if you recognize this and just say it out to fill in the blank. Here, this first one. Keep your eye on the ball. Look at the next one. The sky is the roof. That's Michael Jordan. The sky is the limit. There you go. Look at the next one. You can talk the talk, but can you? Okay, you know that one as well. It's time to put up, or I just put that one in there because Mama wouldn't let me say shut up. And I just wanted the whole place to say it. I wanted to be able to legally say that here. Look at this next one. Put your money where your. Okay, we know that one. Look at this next one. Who shot? Now, you're my people. When you can go back and remember who shot JR, you're my kind of people. Got another one here. What goes up must come down. And that's the one I want to question here a little bit. What goes up must come. What if it doesn't have to come down? What if once we lift our eyes to Jesus and we put our eyes on Jesus Christ, do they have to come down? Do we have to take our eyes off Jesus? And that's what I want to talk about today, is putting our eyes on Jesus and then not taking our eyes off of him. Focusing our lives on him. And what I want us to do is look at a very familiar New Testament story in the life of Christ that I think is going to lay out some ideas for us, help us see how the importance of putting our eyes on Christ and keeping them there. And then also even more importantly, is the things that can happen in our days that help us, that hurt us, that take our eyes off of Christ. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14 the whole time. If you want to turn there, it's going to be on the screen as well. Matthew 14. We'll start with verse 22. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, we just jumped right in there. It says immediately. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get in the boat. What is the immediately? And if you back up and read in Matthew 14, you see what the immediately was. The first of the chapter, you find out that John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, person he respected the most, had been executed, had been beheaded by Herod. And the word has come to Jesus. And Jesus withdraws with his disciples to a private place. And you can understand that. But while he was there, the people came. They followed Jesus, and they want to hear him teach. They want to see him perform miracles. And so they come, and this is the instance where he teaches and preaches all day, but there's nothing to eat. And he produces the food, and he feeds the 5,000. That's the immediately. And then this is where it picks up here, that after he's tried to get away and be by himself, he tries it again. So he sends the people away. The disciples, meanwhile, as Jesus goes to have a little private time, they find themselves in a storm. In a storm. And we're going to point out a couple of things. We go on here. A storm that wasn't just a momentary storm. Look at verses 25 through 27. During the fourth watch of the night, in other words, this had gone on all night long. They had been in this storm all night long. Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." You know, this is a double, triple kind of afraid. You're in a storm. You're afraid of the storm. It's night. You've been in the darkness for hours, and you're probably exhausted as well, fighting your way through this storm. And then you think you see a ghost. This is just a double, triple kind of afraid. And Jesus said what we've talked about. The first thing the angel says, the first thing when the Lord appears before somebody is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, because they had a lot to be afraid of. But obviously Jesus is wanting them to look at him. Jesus wouldn't have came about in this way, and he wouldn't have said, don't be afraid. Hey, it's just me, if he didn't want the disciples to look to him. Apparently, he knew that they needed to focus their eyes on him during this time, so he makes himself visible to them. Now, what I want to do now is just kind of, as we continue through this story, is look at a couple of things that can get our eyes off of him, the things that the disciples were experiencing here. The first one was this: fear. Fear is a huge factor in our lives. Whether you call it a healthy fear or fear factors into just about every decision that we make. And one way or another, fear is active. Have you ever watched go to YouTube or something and see a cruise ship that's caught in a storm? You need to go to YouTube and see some of the videos they put. These people go on a cruise and end up in a storm, and I'm talking about the ship is rocking and water's crashing over the side. I wouldn't be very happy if I went on a cruise, a pleasure cruise, and end up in a storm that you're afraid you're going to lose your life in. I've been out deep sea a few times in my life. I've been on one cruise, and thank the Lord it was good weather for that. None of the stormy weather. But when I was in Collinsville, Virginia, the first church that I served at, we would get together every year. It was a group of men, and we would come down to Atlantic Beach, Morehead City, and we would go out on a deep-sea fishing trip. I mean, it would be a bunch of us. You know, we'd go out on the Carolina Princess or the Captain Stacy, and some of you are familiar with that. And for years we did that, and it was just so much fun, men getting away and doing that. One time, and it just so happens it was the last time that we did it, we get there, and it doesn't seem like anything's bad, But as soon as we started out of that harbor, the waves started. I mean, there was water breaking over the front of the boat. One of the guys, and I can remember him today, went up to the captain. He says, if you'll get close enough to that shore, I'll give you $100. You don't even have to stop. I'll jump off. And people were sick before we got out of sight of land. People hanging over the sides, throwing up. And as we fished all day, it never let up. It was just rock and roll. I was so afraid I was going to get sick. I'd never been seasick. I didn't want this to be the first time. And I remember hadn't eaten anything, but I think I ate a nab all day and drank Sprite. I was afraid to eat. I was afraid not to eat. I'm not saying this to be gross, but I saw more throw up in that one day than I've seen in my entire life combined. But I can imagine just kind of being in a situation like that. It never lets up. It's relentless. Can't you identify with the disciples in this situation? Can't you identify with where they find themselves in? You know, it's a lot easier to not be afraid when everything is smooth, when everything is calm, when we think we've got a plan that's going to keep everything together. But fear causes us to do certain things. Sometimes fear with you will cause you to focus on your past. You know, you bring up the past decisions. Why did I do these things? God can't stay by me because all the things that I've done. Sometimes it causes us to jump all ahead to the future, and we start laying out a future. What am I going to do? What if I don't survive? What if this happens? What if that happens? What's going to happen in the future? And we're thinking 20, 30 years down the road. And then sometimes fear causes us to tunnel vision to the very moments we're living in right then. And we think of nothing but the storm that we're in. And the storm is the only thing that we think about. But it's not the storm. It was the sight of Jesus walking on the water that caused them the great amount of fear. Have you noticed that? They were fighting a storm, but it says when they saw Jesus, that's when they were terrified. Now we know why they didn't recognize Jesus. Number one, they'd never seen anybody walk on water. Two, it was a storm. It was night. They weren't expecting it, and they see a man walking across the water. You know, sometimes the storms that we're in, the times that we're living, cause us to see Jesus in a different way. It causes us to see the love of God in a different way. God is still the same. We just see him differently. The storm causes that. The fear causes that. It doesn't change. The storm or whatever we're going through doesn't change who God is. It just changes how we see him. Look at the next couple of verses 28 through 30. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. And the second thing I want us to notice here that gets in the way of keeping our eyes on Jesus is distractions. You know, we talked about that a few weeks ago, distractions. And it's no surprise that when we're reading this story that it was Peter who spoke up, is it? And that's not a surprise. If you said, who is in this boat is going to speak up, you say, it's got to be Peter. And he does. He questions the situation. He questions Jesus out there. He says, if you're doing it, can I come out there and do it too? And maybe he's thinking, I'd be better out of the boat with Jesus than in the boat without Jesus. I don't know. But he shows a tremendous amount of courage, and he does that. But here's a wise saying. Whenever or whatever Satan can't destroy, he will distract. If he can't destroy you, if he can't destroy your faith, he will try to distract you from God. You see, that's all he has to do. That's all he has to do is distract us. You know, that's nothing new. That's a tactic that he's used from the very beginning. When Jesus went out into the wilderness to be tested after he was baptized by John, he went out, and it says, remember, Satan just put temptation before him. Turn these stones into bread. And Jesus would always answer him with the appropriate scripture or whatever. He says, you need to test God, see if he would save you if you jumped off of this high place. And Jesus says, oh, you don't put your Lord your God to a test. And finally he gets to the one where he says, if you'll bow down and worship me, you can have all of the kingdoms of the world. So he knew Jesus was going to have them anyway. But he said, this is a shortcut. This is an easier way. And finally Jesus just said, get away from me. Get away from me. Jesus was saying, I do not want to be distracted by these things. In 2019, 1 minute on the worldwide internet, just 1 minute, is estimated that 188 million emails went through. That's in 1 minute. 18.1 million texts. I think that happens in a Sunday here. But anyway, 18.1 million texts, 4.5 million videos viewed on the internet. You think we've got anything that can distract us? That's 1 minute of the internet. Beethoven, the great composer, started losing his hearing at the age of 30. And you can imagine if you're a music composer and you begin to lose your hearing, and you say, that's awful, that's terrible, and that's how he looked at it. By the time he was 45 years old, he was totally deaf and actually contemplated suicide. But it was after losing his hearing that Beethoven composed, published, and is remembered most for the music that he wrote after losing his hearing. And he devised ways to feel and to remember and to feel the harmony of the notes. And those who knew him best said once he lost his hearing, he didn't have to listen to the soundtrack to the world. And he could focus solely on that. What we would see and consider torture and imprisonment, and I know I'll mispronounce this, but the Chinese pastor who was known as the father of so much of the church movement in communist China, Wang Bingdao, was in prison for over 25 years for simply doing nothing but being faithful to the scriptures and continuing to preach. 16 of those years he was in solitary confinement. 5 straight years, every day he was interrogated and tried to get him to deny Christ. What we would see as torture and unusual punishment, he saw as a respite from the world, a respite from the world. He said it was there in that cell that I had no distractions but except to be in the presence of God. Simon Peter had the faith to step out of the boat, but then that's when he got distracted. And many of us have already put our faith in Jesus Christ. We've got in the boat with Jesus. We've said, hey, I'm with you. You're my ride or die. I'm going with you all the way, Jesus. But something's happened that's distracted us. Maybe we've taken bold steps in the past, but distractions have kept us and caused us to back up. You want to know whether you're distracted? I do this to myself. You want to know if you're distracted? The beginning of the week, write down the things you want to do for Christ this week. Write down the things that you want to do for Him this week. End of the week, see how many of them you did. And without exception, you will find that the ones you did not get to, you were distracted by something or some event. Go back to Matthew 14, start with verse 31. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And that's the third thing here, is doubt. Jesus quickly identified what Simon Peter's problem was. He doubted. The same man who got in the boat when Jesus said, y'all get in the boat and go the other side, Peter did it. The same man who got out of the boat and walked on water when Jesus told him to, did it. Is the same man who doubted and began to sink. The disciples should have known that something was up when Jesus told them to get in the boat. If just a few chapters before that is when Jesus said, get in the boat, and he went to sleep, and they was on a storm on the same lake, the same sea, and they thought they were going to drown, and they said to Jesus, that's when they said the famous words, wake up, Jesus, don't you care? They should have known something was up when he said, get in the boat. And then he calmed the boat and said the same thing. Why are you afraid? When it's stormy, when the pleasure cruise turns into stops being pleasurable, when it's dark, when you're tired, doubt can creep in. And it stood out to me, I don't know if it's for the first time, but it really stood out to me this week, that the disciples felt safe when Jesus got in the boat with them. It says the winds calmed down. It was when he got in the boat with them they felt safe. But the honest truth is, they were just as safe in the boat with Jesus on the water than they were as when he got in the boat. You're just as safe no matter what storm you're in, because Jesus is always there. Jesus is always in control. So it doesn't matter whether you see him differently in the storm. He is the same. The only difference is how we look at him, how we look at what he's done, how we let the storm blind us or distract us or cause us to doubt. The difference is if we keep our eyes on Jesus. Psalm 46:1. This is New Testament, in a place it talks, isn't the only place it talks about Jesus and God being present in us. Psalm 46:1 says, God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. It's just so easy. All of us have been there. It's so easy to let the doubts cause us to forget or question the promises. And it changes our way of thinking. Instead of us being completely humble all the time and saying to God, how could you love me like this? Doubt causes us to look at God and say, why don't you love me? Why did you let this happen to me? And that's what it causes to happen to us. In the book of Genesis, a little later over in the book, it's a story of Jacob and Esau. Remember the brothers of Isaac. The sons. They were brothers, the sons of Isaac. And you remember the story of Jacob and Esau, and God has chosen Jacob to be part of this line of founding a great nation, the nation of Israel, in which Jesus would be born out of. And if we're looking at Jacob's behavior, we'd say, God, I'm not sure you're making the right decision here. Jacob had some shady past. He had burned his bridges at home. He had cheated his brother out of things. He had lied to his father. And so he's kind of on the run. And in Genesis 28, we find that Jacob, as he's traveling by himself, he stops for the night to go to sleep. And he said he just laid his head down on a rock, and that's where he slept. And so during his sleep, he had a vision or a dream. He saw a stairwell or a ladder descending from heaven down to earth. And he said the angels were coming and going up and down that. And during that time, he says that the Lord was at the top of the ladder or staircase in heaven. And he spoke the words to him and reaffirmed the promises that he had made to Abraham and to his father Isaac. And out here in this wilderness, this desert place, a man sleeping with a rock for his pillow, he tells him this in Genesis 28:15. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. You see, right where he was sleeping was a place that the promised land was to be. You know, that's a great dream for a man who's burned all his bridges. Cheated his brother to the point that his brother wants to kill him. Lied to his father on his deathbed. Can never go back home. And you get a promise like this, that a God says, I'm going to keep my promises I made to your grandfathers, your father, the promise I make to you. I will keep my promises. And this is the part of that story that I love. I want you to listen to this in verse 16. He says, when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. I love how the Bible understates things. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Could it be possible? Could it be possible that God is there all the time, and He's working in our lives, no matter whether it's a high point, mountaintop, or valley, that God is there, and we just don't realize it because some things have happened that cause us to stop seeing Him. I'm not making light of those things because they're serious things. But we've just stopped seeing Him. What goes up doesn't have to go down. Let's keep our eyes up. Let's keep our eyes on God. Through the storms, through it all, keep your eyes on Him.